Hi everyone, I'm Vladyslav Novikov, and joining me is Andriy Dobriansky, Director of Communication at the Ukrainian Congress Committee of America. Andrei, hello.
Hi, thanks for having me back on.
So let's start. Institute for the Study of War looked at the new peace plan between the US and Russia. Full surrender in exchange for nothing. I mean, what the?
Yes, we have a number of press reports about a 28-point peace plan that came out on Wednesday here in the United States. This was tied timing-wise to Steve Witkov's announced plan to meet up with Ukrainian officials in Turkey. That meeting did not take place. We did have President Zelensky still meeting with President Erdogan, where they discussed having a bilateral session in the future. As for this proposed peace plan, it has been reported that it was the plan put together by Steve Witkoff along with Kirill Dmitriev, the representative of the enemy state, when he was in the United States in October. We had some input nominally by the State Department, is being reported. However, the State Department is not commenting on this proposal at all. The White House is really not commenting on this proposal. In fact, nobody's really commenting on this proposal other than Steve Witkoff and Kirill Dmitriev, who apparently the Russian side is putting this out online as a ultimatum that President Trump was going to give to President Zelensky, and the facts that were put out in disinformation online were that the Secretary of the Army and Military were going to press President Zelensky, who wasn't in Kyiv on the day that they arrived. They were going to force President Zelensky to sign this. This was a completely separate visit from Steve Witkoff. The Army Secretary was actually very interested in forming new agreements with the Army of Ukraine. He met with General Sirsky. So there was a lot of misinformation around, and the biggest red flag for us understanding this is that nobody other than Steve Witkoff is really proposing this on the behalf of either the United States government or even the Russian government is not really saying that this is their position. So it's a very odd proposal, and we will see what happens in the coming days.
Yeah, I have idea. I mean, maybe this plan the result of Trump and Putin getting too friendly.
Well, I said it's an odd proposal. It is a completely capitulation as a proposal. So it's odd in how it was released to the public. As to what the underlying intentions are, Steve Witkoff was given a command by President Trump that you need to, now that you fixed peace in the Middle East, which is not peace, now you need to fix peace in Ukraine and stop that war. And the only way that Steve Witkoff has the ability to do that is working with other people. He has not demonstrated that he himself has made any deals for President Trump. It took Jared Kushner to come back to the Middle East for them to put a proposal on the table. Steve Witkoff was not able to do that by himself. We all remember that he went to the Middle East in February. He announced the ceasefire. And then 3 days later, he was on American television saying that he was shocked that Hamas lied to him. In a similar way, Steve Witkoff has done several visits to St. Petersburg, met with the Russian dictator several times, but he has not come to Ukraine a single time. And so it is impossible for him to understand what the framework of an agreement needs to be if he's only listening to one side. And in effect, he is trying to argue on behalf of Russia to Ukraine, which we know neither Ukraine will agree to this, nor will any of the European partners that are very important to have security guarantees. And that's going to be the major part of this. Any kind of ceasefire is going to have to be security guarantees.
Mm-hmm. What the EU's position of this peace plan in your view? What's your take?
Well, we heard from the Steve Witkoff side that they don't care about the EU. So that's strike one for this peace plan. We heard from Kaya Kallas today. We heard many other members of the European Union talking about the fact that we need to support Ukraine and that any proposals that do not include Ukraine's I won't say demands, but requests in terms of a true negotiation, those aren't really true peace plans. So I think we're still at the point where we need to see, I think Europe needs to see some kind of honesty from the enemy side, which they haven't demonstrated. They haven't demonstrated like Ukraine did almost 250 days ago when Ukraine said we will agree to a 30-day ceasefire. Nothing like that has happened on the Russian side. And in fact, Russia has increased attacks every single time. Every single time President Trump had a telephone conversation with Putin, on the day that he met with him in Alaska, President Putin launched attacks on Ukraine. And on the day that Steve Witkoff announced his plan, the eve of World Children's Day, Russia launched one of the biggest attacks on Western Ukraine, as well as Dnipro, which I believe are still happening today. This is a demonstration of a lack of faith. And I haven't even mentioned the fact that Russian spy ships are off the coast of the United Kingdom today and provoking a big response by the UK Minister of Defense.
Mhm. 9 days after a major corruption story about Zelensky circle came out, Putin and Trump are offering him surrender. That's a strange coincidence, is it?
Yes. Well, the way, unfortunately or fortunately, one or the other, this story has not raised up too high in American press. I think it's the corruption scandal is too difficult to understand. The fact that there's graft on the local level that get passed up to these former ministers, it is not, for lack of a better word, sexy scandal. It is more impressive when you have the president of the United States receiving a gold bar by the Swiss delegation for relief and tariffs, or money being passed over more openly in the United States. And we have, unfortunately, a little bit more scandals on corruption going on in the United States as in Ukraine. However, you mentioned the timing, and the timing goes into the three factors of disinformation that many people should be familiar by now. There is disinformation, which is false information that is shared unknowingly, but it is out there. There's misinformation that is deliberately sharing false information to get a reaction. And then there's malinformation. And this is a clear example of malinformation. So the evidence is true. There is an indictment for these former ministers, and there are further questions about who in the government knew about this. It is malinformation in that it is true information, and it is released, as you said, at a very inconvenient time for a political party. And why is it the fact that this this indictment was brought to bear at this moment, exactly right when the office of the president of Ukraine and the head of it, Mr. Yermak, was supposed to meet with Steve Witkoff? It has been proposed that either the United States did not want Mr. Yermak there, Russia was trying to make sure he wasn't a part of this, as he is one of the for whether people like him or not, he is a very strong negotiator, and as evidenced by many of the deals that were signed with the United States, many of which the United States is not happy with because they thought Ukraine got too much out of it, and so therefore it is a big question. However, what we do have are actual indictments against people. We do have actual testimony and recordings of people who had been doing graft for a long time, and in the perspective of the West, there are many people here who are actually hailing what Ukraine does in the middle of a war, which is arresting people. This doesn't even happen in the United States. There are senators who received gold bars in their office, and they were allowed to sit as senators until a final investigation happened. Here we have indictments coming out against former ministers, and this is something, again, on a much higher level than even happens in the United States. So there are many people, even in the law enforcement world here in the United States, that actually are praising Ukraine for what it did.
Mhm. How much do corruption scandal around Ukraine affect international support?
I think it could. I think on the base level, which is people who don't understand this, and this is one of the reasons that we did not see a lot of editors in newspapers or producers on television in the United States pushing this up, because it's a complicated story to understand what graft is, how long it's existed in the energy sphere of Ukraine, that this actually dates back in terms of the kind of scheme that was happening to like the Soviet times, how people were just not building things until they were being paid a certain amount of money. But on the base level, so these are regular everyday Americans or everyday Europeans who are watching the news online, not so much those who watch news broadcasts, journalists who have verified editors who do fact checking. But there's a lot of YouTube channels now that are just people talking without any factual evidence. And unfortunately, that's where a lot of this misinformation and disinformation is spread, when they take malinformation, which is actual information released at the wrong time, and then they start adding things like Ukraine is always corrupt. Ukraine is going to be stealing money from us. And here we actually have a different instance, which is Ukraine is actually fighting against corruption at a bigger level than the West. And it is proud to show that it is going to do this at the same time as a war is happening, which is in effect saving American tax money because they want to make sure that no money is being lost.
Were you personally surprised by this scandal?
I think I was surprised at the scale of it, the 100 million US dollars. I think the fact that it was specifically about the energy infrastructure, that it was being delayed and being built because of this graft. And I think, as many of my personal conversations with Ukrainians in Ukraine, my personal visits to Ukraine while it's under attack, I cannot imagine that anybody that was involved in this will be comfortable. I know people who have had to carry their grandmothers down from an 11-story building because there is no energy for the elevator. I've known people who cannot go to the hospital because the hospital doesn't have power. This is not a regular occurrence in Ukraine. I'm just pointing out how deeply affecting these loss of power has been, loss of heat during the winter times when I've been in Ukraine. And I cannot imagine that any Ukrainian will allow this to go forward.
What should Ukraine do? Can we still fight corruption if Zelensky doesn't seem willing, or is it just impossible right now?
I think we are seeing that Ukraine is fighting corruption, and we saw this in the big response to the
Yeah,
proposed legislation.
sorry, but many people says it's not enough.
Oh, I'm not saying just even now, but what happened in the summer?
Yeah.
In the summer, when the legislation passed to have oversight of NABU and SAP with the prosecutor general in Ukraine, and you saw that people in the middle of a war, with the highest numbers of air bombs that had been at that point attacked on Ukraine, people were in the streets outside of government buildings. Because it's that important to them. That symbol to the rest of the world still resonates. People still remember the fact that people went out into the streets in the summer to protest against what was happening with NABU. So it is very clear for those of us in the West who pay attention to Ukraine, who visit Ukraine, that Ukraine is fighting corruption. But your question is it enough? And it's always a problem with ingrained systems such as this graft in the energy scheme, which again, some people will point out that there has been some level of graft dating back to the Soviet times, because that was just the way that things were being done in the 1980s at the end of the Soviet regime, when there was simply not enough money. And the only way things happened were through bribery and schemes like this. The fact that you have such a long history in various spheres of the government is why, when the government decides to completely change things, such as the introduction of Prozoro or in the introduction of the Dia app, ways of completely changing the system and not relying on, say, the energy transmission system, which is, again, a very ancient system. We know that Ukraine is going to upgrade to a brand new grid. We'll have to upgrade to a brand new energy grid at some point because so many elements have been destroyed. And it's only, I think, once we change many infrastructure elements or elements of a Ukrainian society as a whole, that we eliminate corruption. So it's not necessarily targeting the criminals, it's targeting the systems that they are taking advantage of, many of which just don't work in the 21st century.
Yeah, absolutely. I have one more interesting fact. Don't you think the whole corruption in Ukraine topic is a bit exaggerated? Transparency International says Ukraine dropped only 1 point last year, while the US lost 4, but no one talks about that.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, at the very beginning of the war, even in 2014, we were pointing out that there's a very big difference between corruption in Ukraine and corruption in Russia. But also, just in terms of this case, specifically, when we're talking about $100 million of graft, this was being done over a period of time in smaller increments than just that $100 million. What is happening in the United States? The president of the United States was visited by a Swiss delegation. They gave him a one-of-a-kind Rolex watch, a gold bar with his name on it, and another president. And after that, he lowered the tariffs on Switzerland. Um, there are levels here of how this graft is happening. And in the United States, there was also a Senator, Bob Menendez, a longtime chair of the Foreign Relations Committee. He was documented of having multiple gold bars given to him by foreign lobbyists for investigation, and he did not lose his Senate seat until a final ruling was made by the court and he was sentenced. Up until that point, he was fully able to be a senator in the United States Senate. This is different than what's happening in Ukraine. In Ukraine, not just because of what the government is putting out, or the NABU is putting out that indictment, but as I said before, so many people have been affected by the attacks on the energy grid that I can't imagine any Ukrainian, if they saw one of those ministers on the street, that they would let him go without giving him a piece of his mind at the very least.
Yeah, and Trump own enrichment is a much bigger scandal and
Absolutely.
precedent. But Western media keep shooting about Ukraine.
Yes, I believe that right now we are at a pivotal moment for the Trump administration in terms of its political power. We are seeing in its first defeat when the files for Epstein were voted on by everybody but one member of Congress voted to release the Epstein files, which is something the president did not want to happen. It was passed unanimously in the Senate. This is the first time the president has had people of his own party voting against him. And this is the first crack that people have been looking at in Congress. If it happens that more and more people will vote against them throughout the year, if it happens that perhaps there's a change from one party to another, the Democrats win in 26 in, say, the Senate or the House of Representatives, and investigations start. We haven't had any investigations of what's happening because the president has had total control. So it's going to be very interesting. He is at a moment of total control. We are 200 days into the administration or more, closing in on 300 days of this administration, and his power is diminishing every day, as every president does, especially in their second term. He is not running for president again. He has no political power to promise in the next election. So every day that goes on is like he's less powerful, and that means the longer he stays in office, I mean, because there are serious people who are questioning whether he might resign before the end of his term to get away from the investigations. The longer he stays in office, the more the investigations will finally start. But to this day, not a single committee in Congress has investigated anything as we have been talking about, this alleged graft and enrichment of President Trump's personal family during his presidency.
Mhm. I want more details. In general, what's going on with the Epstein story? How much trouble is that causing for Trump now?
Well, 20,000 files were released by a House committee before this vote. The vote calls for all the files, all the information that is in the government's possession to be released. What wasn't released there's 20,000 emails. What wasn't released in those emails are pictures and video that we know that witnesses that were interviewed by the FBI. So the FBI has pictures and videos. We don't know who they're of, but we know that naked women are in them. We know that some famous people are in them. We don't know who exactly. What we know in the emails that came out through the House investigation in the House of Representatives is that in those 20,000 emails, by far, the one person that is mentioned more than anybody is President Trump. So prior to this release of this information, President Trump had said it was all a hoax. We remember when Donald Trump and Elon Musk got into an argument this year. Elon Musk said on Twitter, Donald Trump is in the Epstein files, which at this point, we had no idea what was happening. In these 20,000 files, we know that he is mentioned in emails by Jeffrey Epstein to people, or from from other people to Jeffrey Epstein. We know that Donald Trump is mentioned more than any other people, more than Bill Clinton, who is mentioned in them, more than Larry Summers, who's former president of Harvard, who was mentioned in them. It is by far Donald Trump who is mentioned in them, and we are just beginning to see what the involvement is of this person, a known criminal, a pedophile, who by himself on tape has stated that for 10 years, Donald Trump was his best friend, his closest friend. in the entire world. And we don't know what that means. We don't know what time they spent together. President Trump is very adamant about saying that he kicked him out of his private club in Florida. But what happened before then? What was this 10-year history of the two of them? And did they travel together? Did they spend time together? We don't know that, and that is something that is going to come out in this release of files, because as of yesterday, President Trump was forced to sign this legislation that Congress sent to him.
So, Andriy, thank you for being with us, and see you next time.
Thank you very much. Next time it is.